Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ryan Bijan, host of Cowtown Movie Classics, and tonight we are celebrating Good Friday with a very special presentation of director Cecil B. DeMille's 1932 film, The Sign of the Cross. Now, this movie, it works on multiple levels. On one hand, it truly is a powerful, moving epic of faith. On the other hand, it's one of the wildest pre-code exploitation films you're ever going to see, with an amazing cast featuring Fredric March, Claudette, Colbert, and one of his earliest feature film roles, Charles Laughton as the Emperor Nero. Joining us tonight is the prolific film historian and author. He's written the books Forbidden Hollywood, When Sin Ruled the Movies, and he's the co-author of the book Cecil B. DeMille, The Art of the Hollywood Epic, with Cecilia DeMille Presley. Please welcome Mr. Mark A. Vieira. How are you doing tonight, Mark?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you.
So the movie was released in 1932 at the height of what we would consider the pre-code period. So if we have people in the audience who may be unfamiliar with this era, what does pre-code mean, and why is the Sign of the Cross such a quintessential example of this era?
Well, pre-code was the period between March 1930, when the studios signed an agreement to let an agency called the Studio Relations Committee tell them what they could film and what they could not. And that was March 1930. But until June 1934, they ignored the code. So in June 34, a consortium of Catholic bishops, lay people, Jewish people over the country, there was a big to-do. Might call it a protest that Hollywood was making bad movies, harmful to children and young people. So they forced the industry through a boycott, a national boycott. They forced the industry into accepting a production code that had teeth, that had fines and very, very exacting regulations. So that was July 1st, 1934. But the period between March 30 and July 1st, 34, that was the pre-code era, when the studios were desperate for revenue because of the Great Depression, which pretty much started in mid-1930. The stock market crash was October 1929, but the real effects weren't felt until the banks started closing and factories started closing around mid-1930. So the studios had problem in that if people had no money, they couldn't pay to go see a movie. But if they were bored enough and desperate enough, they'd find that money somewhere, especially if they were going to see something in the movies they hadn't seen before, something naughty. And this was the whole basis of the pre-code era. Now, some great and some trashy films were made, but the point is, there was content in the films of those 4 years that would not be seen again until 1968, when the code was abolished.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned seeing something naughty. We're definitely going to get a taste of that tonight. So, The Sign of the Cross, to put things into context, this came out in 1932. It was made by Paramount Pictures. But my understanding is the time leading up to this film, this was the lowest point of Cecil B. DeMille's career.
Right. He had a huge success, as you recall from your film you showed, The Ten Commandments, 1923. And that was, he envisioned that as the first of a trilogy of films that would be about the giving of the law. The King of Kings would be about the interpretation of the law through Jesus Christ. And The Sign of the Cross would be about the Christians who are preserving the law and carrying it forth and struggling to maintain their faith. What happened with this film was that he had a big success with Ten Commandments, but then Adolph Zucker, the head of Paramount Pictures, which, DeMille had in a way co-founded when he started his company back in 1914 with the Squaw Man, Zucker was jealous of DeMille's following, of his popularity. He resented DeMille, and DeMille also spent a lot of money. But DeMille, wasn't a spendthrift. He just had to do these things right, and it was expensive. So Zucker pushed DeMille out of Paramount. DeMille became an independent producer in Culver City, where Selznick Pictures later was, and where Culver Studios are now. And DeMille didn't take so well to being a businessman in terms of producing and running a company at the same time. He had a great business sense. There's no question about that. He was on banking, various banks, board of directors, and he had a tremendous amount of real estate holdings and oil and everything. But when it came to running a film company, that was different. His attention was divided. So he took an offer from MGM. Louis B. Mayer and Irving Thalberg said, why don't you come and you can be an independent producer on our lot, and we'll pay part of your costs, and then you can make these films, and then we'll split the proceeds. Well, the first one was a success. It was his first talking film, Dynamite. The second one, Madam Satan, was not a success. The third one, the remake of The Squaw Man, was a terrible flop. So DeMille left MGM, and this would be early 31, and the Depression was really starting to affect Hollywood at this point. And he couldn't get a deal at any other studio, including Paramount, which he had helped found. So he went on a trip to Europe. He went to Russia. He looked at all the different kinds of films being made, all the new theories of dialectical montage. And he went to France and saw how they're making films there, and England, and Germany. And he really thought a lot about how films are being made in the early years of the talkies, which was pretty dull in many cases. They just aimed the camera, let people talk. So he said, this is a movie, it has to move. So he came back to Hollywood. He thought, I know what I want to film. I saw a play when I was 14 years old called The Sign of the Cross, about the Christians and the Romans and the lions and everything wicked that in between. So he pitched that to MGM, Universal. Nobody was interested. But his friend, Jesse Lasky, with whom he had started the business in 1914 with The Squaw Man, was still at Paramount. And he said, hey, people, this is a great filmmaker. As great as D.W. Griffith, as great as Ernst Lubitsch, he has a bankable commercial idea. But Zucker was still there at Paramount. And he said, no. He said, what if Cecil puts up half the money? $650,000. All right, we'll do that. But he has to adhere to the schedule, to the budget. So Cecil said, okay, I'll have my business manager on the set, and the minute the money runs out, we turn the lights off and turn off the camera. So they started in July of 1932, filming the scenes in the streets of Rome that really look like ancient Rome. It's wonderful what the art direction was done by Mitchell Locke, who had been with DeMille since 1919, off and on, but he became a great director on his own later. Art direction. He did the costumes, too, for Claudette Colbert. Cecil B. DeMille saw Claudette Colbert walking between the sound stages one day and said to her, how would you like to play the wickedest woman in the world? She said, well, it'd be a break after the dull parts I've been doing recently. So, and then they got Charles Laughton to play Nero, not knowing what they were getting into. And Fredric March was a big star, so he was going to carry the star, the marquee value of the film. And Elisa Landi was from Fox Film, and they had not been able to make her a star, even though she was a very beautiful woman and very talented and very intelligent. So DeMille got her, too. So he really had a solid cast. And they got into filming this, and the production code people, which is at that time the Studio Relations Committee, said, well, just be careful with these scenes, and just be careful how you handle it. Don't make these Romans too nightclubish. He said, don't worry, I'll be all right. Well, without Cecil's direction, essentially, Charles Laughton made Nero into a real camp figure, really effeminate. Well, he's crazy in the first place. That helps but it's just tremendously enjoyable to watch. And
Hmm.
indeed, there was a Hollywood preview of the film just later, of course. Uh, People were literally fell into the aisles laughing at the things that Charles Laughton was doing.
Yeah.
And then the scene of this dance, which came to be called the lesbian dance, they thought, well, let's just do it and see where the chips fall. Well, he didn't have a problem with the production code people. They said, it's yes, it's very wicked but and exciting, but the story calls for that. To justify what happens later, you have to have that at that part of the film.
Hmm.
So they finished the film. They pulled. He was shooting pygmies fighting Amazon women, and hey, we're out of money. Okay, they turned the lights out, and so they edited the film. He had to fight with Paramount over certain editing things, but the film came out as he wanted it. No one tampered with it at that point. It premiered in November of 1932. The second week, it moved to a second theater in New York, and that theater owner cut scenes of the arena, saying they were too disgusting, violent, gruesome. And then the Catholic Church had went on the rampage and said, "What is this dance? What are you doing with? You've taken Catholic mythology and twisted it into this kind of porno movie, and we're not going to stand for this." Of course, at the same time, there were priests taking altar boys and children from school to go see the movie because they wanted them to see what the Christians suffered. We think about, wow, those movies, those pre-code movies, what people saw in the theaters in those days. Well, the fact is, from everything we were able to discover from documents of the period, from November through, I guess, the following summer, a lot cut the movie. So what you're going to see is what showed the first night, how it was reviewed, but not everybody saw that version. Uh, Curiously enough, though, nobody cut the dance, even though it was a big cause célèbre. Nobody cut it. So in 1992, Cecilia DeMille Presley, Cecil B. DeMille's granddaughter, told Universal, "I have a complete print, nitrate print in good condition." And everybody said, let's do this. So Robert Gitt of the AFI and UCLA Film Archive, all these different places, he floated around. He is a great person. He supervised the restoration, and they made an internegative from that nitrate print and sweetened the soundtracks a bit, although the soundtracks for that period were amazing, and I don't use that word lightly.
Hmm.
They made 11 tracks in the arena scenes that had never been done before. There were all kinds of effects that DeMille saw in European films, stop printing and montage, all kinds. This film is really the first sound film, and sound films have been around since 1928, essentially. This was the first one to really integrate sound, image, music. It has a great score, too, by the way, by Rudolf Kopp. This was the first film to really make a movie, not a talkie. And that's an important. So you can watch it now. I mean, the acting styles are dated, of course, but the visual style was the first film of that period where it was just very boldly done and unapologetically cinematic, as the silent films had been.
No, absolutely. It is a tremendous cinematic experience. And tonight, like you said, we're fortunate enough to watch it in its original uncut form. Mark, thank you so much. We will pick up after the film. And if you're in the audience, you can hear the rest of our conversation. Without further ado, from 1932, director Cecil B. DeMille's The Sign of the Cross. To me, this is a film of tremendous power. It's certainly, if you're asking me what my favorite Cecil B. DeMille films are, it has to be in the top three. I think it's just an incredible experience. It has the spectacle, it has the sex and the savagery, but as I said earlier, it is genuinely a story about faith, and I feel like it treats those elements very respectfully.
The film was tremendously successful. It reinstated DeMille's career, made a star of Charles Laughton, made a star of Claudette Colbert. So it was great for Paramount. It was just, it was a gamble, but it paid off. It was just tremendously successful. However, these cuts that were done on the prints that were sent to the theaters, they weren't done to the negative. But in 3 years, when after this production code came in, and Joseph Breen was the head of that production code administration, Paramount said, "Oh, we want to re-release the Sign of the Cross," and he said, "Well, yeah, but we're going to cut something out of it. You can't have that stuff in there."
Hmm.
So they chopped it up. They chopped the negative up and threw away the trims. Then it came out again in 44, and they put a prologue on it showing World War II bomber flying over Rome. And then they go from that into the flashback into ancient Rome, and there was more stuff cut. So I won't say it was a different film, but it was certainly felt different. Yeah, when this was first on TV in 1962, even though the rest of the Paramount films had gone on TV in 58. And like, well, why it's so late? Because the DeMille estate uh, wanted a special deal from Lou Wasserman and MCA, and they got it. So anyway, this was on TV Easter Sunday of 62. I saw it. I was 12 years old, almost. And it was just so enthralling. But I would notice that there were these jumps, like, doop, and I thought, well, did the TV station show it before? And is that where a commercial was? Or what is this? I didn't understand that those were the parts they cut out in 35 and in 44. So I didn't realize I was seeing, a truncated version. So that's the version I saw on TV in 16 millimeter rental prints all the way up to 1981 when the Los Angeles County Museum of Art did a 100th birthday thing for, a series for DeMille showing the nitrate prints. And when I saw this film complete for the first time, wow, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was a good 10 minutes missing.
Hmm.
So anyway, we're in a happy era to see these things looking so good and so complete.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I've always read about the 1944 re-release, how they did these. They shot, like you said, there was a modern day prologue. I think it was tied into World War II. And that's what's kind of ironic now is that footage is hard to come by because I've never been able to see that later version. Can you describe that for the audience a little bit, what
Yeah,
some of these additions were?
with this, I think it's a B-17 or B-24, and in the cockpit there's the soldiers, the um, Air Force officers flying the plane, and then there's a chaplain. I think it's a priest, and I think it's a Protestant minister too, and they're talking about ancient Rome. And look down there. There's the Colosseum. There's where the things happened and everything. And then as I recall, Barry Fitzgerald, the priestess, and then was born of all this terror and chaos the sign of the cross. And then they dissolved to the fires at the beginning um, with Charles Laughton.
As a Cecil B. DeMille biographer, as a scholar, as a fan of his work, where do you rank The Sign of the Cross? How do you compare it to his other films?
Technically, it's one of the very best. I just think I would say it's an early version of his blockbuster Ten Commandments,
Hmm.
but I think it's more heartfelt than Samson and Delilah.
Yes.
And my favorite is Union Pacific,
Hmm.
but still, this has such profound material in it that Union Pacific does not. Um, yeah, I think it's way up there, one of his top four.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned Samson Delilah because I rewatched that one recently, and it's funny at the end when they're in the stadium and the Philistines are trying to torture Samson. He kind of does a restaging of the Colosseum stuff. You see, like the pygmies and the warriors, the
Yeah,
Amazon. I mean, it was 1947, 1948, so it's much more watered down than what we see here. But
yeah,
it is interesting seeing him play with that imagery again.
yeah. I mean, those films never failed to pay off. Greatest Show on Earth. I mean, they're just there's no you never feel cheated by Cecil B. DeMille. He always gives you the feeling something big is coming and something big arrives every time. But I
Hmm.
just the the subject matter wasn't at the same level of importance in every one.
Oh, certainly. Now, what do you think? I've heard criticisms that, Cecil B. DeMille, he kind of had this sanctimonious image. He presented himself as a man of faith. And I feel like that was probably very important to him. But a lot of people criticize him for saying that he used this as an excuse to delve into like depravity, vulgarity. And in this film, you see a little bit of both. What is your stance on that? Do you feel like Cecil B. DeMille kind of truly believed in what he was preaching in, or did he just use it for an excuse to bring on the spectacle?
I think he did. I think he was sincerely a person of faith. There's no question about that. And he felt that he had to carry on his father's work. But he was a very sexual person. And they say also, being half Jewish, he had this an Oriental flavor to his work and if he were just a person from New Hampshire, like Thornton Wilder or somebody, that wouldn't be there. But that exotic sensuality that's really part and parcel of DeMille's work is as much. So he was a real, I won't say divided, but he was two people in a way.
Hmm.
He had that duality.
And I feel like you certainly see that in his work, and that's why I feel like it's so compelling because I do feel that sincerity of faith. I do feel in that longing for uh, hope in humanity. I mean, you look at something like The King of Kings, it's such a beautifully poignant film, an incredible film. Even in the Ten Commandments, you have moments like that. But then he also doesn't want to bore his audience. He knows what they want to see, he wants to entertain them. And it's like, hey, if you can kind of lure them in with these more titillating aspects without making the film too preachy, but still deliver that message, to me, that's a good storyteller.
Right, and he had learned the hard way in the teens that films about social realism, uh, just nobody wanted to see them.
Hmm.
Nobody cared about poor people.
Yeah.
They want to see jewels, satin, our marble columns.
Before we close out now, so this is the final film of our Cecil B. DeMille series. What are some other Cecil B. DeMille films that you would recommend to someone just discovering his work?
I want your audience to see Union Pacific. It is the most enjoyable. It's not really a western. It's about the transcontinental railroad. But oh boy, it's got some fantastic set pieces, and they build, they build, they build, they build. So by the end of this movie, wow, what did I see? It's very, very satisfying movie.
I know I'm certainly going to rewatch it. So, Mark, as perhaps the official Cecil B. DeMille scholar, you have a series on YouTube called DeMille is Hollywood. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, we're doing a series. The DeMille Foundation is doing a series, and I'm producing and directing and narrating these educational videos that are telling the entire DeMille story as is in our book, for starting with the very first film and going all the way. So at this point, we're about to do the Ten Commandments, but the last ones we did was about the early 1920s scandals, and which all touched and affected DeMille's career and his filmmaking. So I recommend, this is on YouTube. DeMille is Hollywood.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for your work. I know I'm a fan of the series. Once again, my name is Ryan Bijan. We'll see you next time.